Hey, it's me again, and this time I'm not cooking or baking anything, thank God. I'm actually sculpting this clay ring dish that I really needed, but I just had to make it extra. Little backstory, the reason why I need a clay dish is because my wedding ring is currently being held a la Shang-Chi by a Paddington stuffed toy. So I started brainstorming on how to make a proper adult ring dish, and the first thing I came up with was this negative space turtle, which is honestly I found kind of weird, but you'll see later that I just ended up following it eventually. And I did a bunch of studies on what pawikan or like sea turtles even look like. And they have this really cute uwu mouth naturally, and I kind of leaned into that, and the final ones look a little like cats, but that's for later. This is most certainly still not a tutorial. You might be wondering what I'm using here. So this is the Premier Stone Powder Clay, and it had been left, well, not out, it was in a pretty faulty Ziploc bag for almost a year, or maybe it's 2 years. Years are starting to lose their meaning in the pandemic. But anyway, the clay had hardened up quite a lot, so I needed to knead it quite a lot in order to get it malleable enough for me to form into a kind of disc shape. Once I had my kind of disc shape, I tried to flatten it out using this tool, which is not a rolling pin and should not be used as such. Get some help. I realized it wouldn't work. I borrowed one of my sister's glue gun sticks, thinking that it would do a better job. Or perhaps not thinking at all. It's probably the latter. Listen, if you've got any spare rolling pins out there, I'm not even going to be shy anymore. Just give it here. I'm using my hands. I'm in the trenches. So what I did was I just kind of formed it with my fingers, and then I used my finger to trace out the shape of the ring dish that I was going to make, and then I used the back end of another tool to trace it out again. Listen. Even I don't know what's going on here. It's as if there's this person who breaks into my house, takes all of my stuff, and gets my camera and everything, and films themselves just being an absolute clown. And then they send me all the files, and I have to piece it together like an archaeologist who just has no idea what this person was thinking. And yet somehow, against all odds.mp3, this person... It's so weird speaking in third person. I was able to make a round shape, and I scored it. I don't think you can see well in this video because the contrast of white clay and bright tropical sunlight, it doesn't work. But anyway, I was working on the rim of the dish, so I made a long snake of clay, and I kind of had to stretch it even longer than I thought it would so that it would go all the way around. Then I employed some of my reconstituted slips. So this is just bits of clay, like trimmings from other clay projects that I did, plus some water, which I use as glue, but this one wasn't mixed very well, and it didn't stick all that well. So I had to use a little bit more brute force than usual to stick that rim onto the plate part. After that, I used this round tool to kind of sketch in the places that my turtles would take. It's just some zimzalabimmery going on, like I have no idea. Once that design was like loosely sketched in, I could start with the actual sculpting of the turtle heads. So there were 2 turtle heads that were going to be above the water because, fun fact, turtles need to breathe, and so they do kind of poke their head above the water every now and then, which is always lots of fun to see. This is the first turtle head I made. I wasn't entirely happy with the shape. It is looking a little bit pug-like, and when I did put it onto the plate, I realized it was just too big, so I had to scrap that piece and resculpt it. Unfortunately, you can't really see what I'm doing here because I'm just using my cell phone camera, so I'm going to try to figure out how to get the contrast on white clay with this super bright sunshine. When I was finished sculpting the head and neck, and I was pretty satisfied with the size, I made a divot in the plate using this tool so that the head would be kind of poking out of the plate rather than just sitting atop, and I feel like it makes for better structural stability. Like, this turtle head isn't just gonna snap off suddenly unless someone does something horrible to it. I also put a little bit of the carapace. Are turtle shells also called carapace? Well, the top of the turtle shell. And then I started to mold the other carapace. So there are 3 turtles in this dish, if you remember from earlier. And the third one has its head underwater, and only the shell is bobbing above the waves. So I formed that shell out of a little dome, and here are the 2 turtles and the third turtle that's underwater. So here I'm just showing you how I do the eye part, although this eye was a little bit goofy, so I scrapped it later on, but this is all I was able to film. So I put in the eye pieces. I don't think I need to describe this really. Put in the eye pieces, I give them eye bags and eyelids, and then I kind of tape those down. I glue those down with some slip, and then kind of blend it into the head. And here are the 2 turtle heads that I was happy with their eyes intact. Next, it was just a matter of gluing everything down, so I scored the clay. It had dried a little bit. This isn't the type of clay that dries in seconds, so thank God for that. But it had dried a little bit, and I needed to wet and score the clay before I could stick the tops of their carapaces on. So these turtles that I'm making, they're kind of this very badly done mishmash fusion of the leatherback sea turtle and the hawksbill sea turtle, which are both fall under like the huge umbrella of pawikan, because I guess our ancestors were just like, it's a turtle's a turtle. And their shells have been used for decorative stuff like jewelry and dishes and stuff like that. But fun turtle fact, the turtle shell is actually fused to its spine, so in order for you to remove the shell, you kind of need to crack their spine open. Am I gonna get kicked off YouTube for saying stuff like that? I don't know. Anyway, another fun turtle fact. The central row of the sea turtle shell is actually made up of something that I can't decide whether it's a hexagon or an octagon, as you can see while I'm drawing here. So it's actually sort of like a hexagon that occupies an octagonal shape, so there's this little fat border of an irregular shape. That's pretty cool, and it made it really hard for me to copy it. So I was satisfied with the deflated soccer ball that I created. I started adding in little bits of mashed up clay to make the waves a little bit more tumultuous. Is that how you pronounce it? A little bit more turbulence in the water, so that it looks like they're actively jumping out of the water and swimming around rather than just bobbing in calm seas. So I was actually quite happy with this design as it was. I was just putting a little bit of wave into the rim to make it a little more dynamic and match the scene inside the bowl dish. But then I realized that I had all this other clay left over. I could have returned this clay to the bag, but it had been sitting out for the several hours that I was sculpting this dish and these little turtles, so it was already kind of like semi-hard. It was... what's the thing for noodles? It was al dente. So I had to use it because I didn't want it to go to waste. And I decided to go with that negative space turtle design that I was laughing at earlier. And I broke up the clay into pieces to form the head, the forelegs, and the tail of the giant turtle that's carrying the dish on its back, or rather, the dish is its back. It's kind of reminiscent of the Great Atuin, the world turtle in the Discworld series, which, it's not copyright infringement because Terry Pratchett just took the same idea from lots of different cultures that have the same flat world being carried by turtle concept. Like there's Chinese myths and Native American myths, and I think some Hindu stories also have a giant turtle carrying the flat world. It's pretty fascinating to me that the flat earth idea is making a huge comeback. Like, we've managed to make people so distrustful of state-affiliated scientists and things like that, and satellite images, that they're just running right back to the world that we knew before people were sailing around it. Or actually, people have been sailing all around the globe for a very, very long time. I guess they just didn't write it down because it wasn't worth writing down. It was probably commonplace to the cultures that were sailing before the age of exploration. They were just like, why am I gonna make a big deal out of a regular Tuesday? So here is basically the final dish in terms of sculpting. I made the front legs actually a little bit longer than the hind legs in an actual turtle. Fun fact, the front flippers are much, much longer than their back flippers. Their back flippers are like little toes. They're very cute. But the front ones are long because they're actually for directing and swimming. So I tried to emulate that a little bit here, that you can see. This turtle's tail is just completely inaccurate. It's a nub. It's bad. But with that out of the way, now it's time for something that you can actually see, which is the painting part. So I let the dish dry for, I think, 2 days before I painted it. I let it dry completely until the surface is a little bit rough and powdery to the touch, because the way that I paint with the acrylics is in very thin watery washes, which would have ruined the clay if it hadn't been dried up enough. First wash that I did is something I call the lowest bitter yellow, because it's the same color as every government building lobby and my high school, which was a government building technically. So, it's bringing back bad memories of waiting in line for nothing. What I did here was that I painted over the turtle's shell and the turtle's faces, and also I went outside the lines and painted the legs and other bits that were underwater. So I'm kind of showing you what's under the waves, but keeping the waves texture. It'll make sense later. The next color that I mixed was a Lumot mossy green blue, and that was to paint on the rocks and corals on the seafloor underneath the turtles. So viewed from above, everything has kind of a bluish tinge, and so I took that into consideration when mixing this color, because it's going to sit underneath a light wash of a very light... I keep saying light. It's going to sit under a wash of a more aquamarine, lighter blue that serves as the water, so that it can kind of blend to make what it looks like from above. Next color I painted on is a forbidden caramel sauce, which if I had less self-control, I would have licked the palette. Luckily, all of this is supposedly non-toxic, so I would have survived to tell the tale, but this paint I bought, I don't know why, it's acrylic, but it's got a really, really bad smell, so I don't know how non-toxic it really is. Anyway, this caramel color goes on all of the turtle's spots, and everything that will sit underneath the darkest color, which is the actual dark brown shell color. The next color I added is this swampy brown, which is the darkest color on the shell, and the lighter color should just peek out under it. So I started painting with this already. Actually, I was thinking about it for a really long time, and then I started painting with it, and I painted quite a lot before I realized I didn't like the way it looked, and I had left too many gaps that were bright yellow. So turtles, they're not actually green. Even green turtles are a little bit more on the yellow side. Underneath, like the lowest skin color, I think is a yellowish color. But looking at the turtle image that I found, that yellow shouldn't peek out as much as I allowed it to. So I went back to Forbidden Caramel. I made a little bit more of Forbidden Caramel, and I covered up a little bit more, or a lot more, of the gaps in the spaces of the shell pattern and on the turtle spots, so that I would get more coverage of the orange color and just finer lines of that yellowish undercolor peeking through. Once I had covered up enough of the space, the yellow spaces with the orange caramel color, orange caramel, I went in with the swampy brown again. So I'm using this dark brown. I mixed together a lot of different colors, just, you know, the colors that shouldn't be together, like red and green. They make this delightful kind of, it doesn't look chocolatey, I'd say like an LBM brown. Ooh. But I don't like using a solid black in painting anything, because I feel like it puts a pre-filter on all of your, like it's already like a pre-color grading of all of the painting. And it just looks nicer without the solid black. I don't like solid blacks. I even painted their eyes with this chocolatey, swampy, poopy brown, because I felt like it makes their face kind of meld more with the rest of their body. So you can see that the eyes are very dark, and your mind kind of tricks you into thinking it's black. Up next was the wettest of the wet washes. So this is what clean seawater looks like. An aquamarine sort of color that I made with a lot of water, because I didn't want to cover up any of the underpainting I had worked so hard to make. I purposely made the turtles a little bit warmer in color than they should be, because I really wanted the parts that were supposedly above water to look very different from the ones that were underwater, because those ones would get the overpainting or the wash of the light blue that would cool it down a little bit. So here you can see that the heads and the shell poking above the water don't get any of the wash, and they look a very different color from the parts of the turtle that are underwater. I could have actually stopped here, but then I went and mixed a darker blue color, so it's a deeper, more of open ocean color, and I used that to fill all of the dips, all of the divots, or the ebbs in the waves around the turtles, just to give it a little bit more texture and make it look a little bit more like waves. I'm not sure if it really did anything, but it was a lot of fun to paint. Next, I made this contaminated white. So with a lot of white paint, I put probably a drop of the light blue wash for the ocean, and then I used this very cheap makeup brush, which is the best art material in the world. I will always sing praises for cheap makeup brushes, and I used that to put a little bit of a frothiness on the crests of the waves. Of course, I'd have to use other materials to get a really good froth up, like the diorama makers use different stuff, like that white gel stuff, to make a good froth, but I think that this was able to highlight the crests of the waves pretty well. Next, I essentially speed painted the bigger turtles, so I mixed up a whole new set of colors which were a lot warmer than the ones on the turtles on the surface, because this turtle is going to be underwater. So if I wanted the colors to pop after I put the wash of light blue, then I had to make them extra warm. Again, this does look kind of like a black, but it's just a really dark brown that I wanted to survive the blue wash that I was going to put on this turtle later. As I mentioned earlier, this ring dish is meant to replace our brave soldier Paddington, who's been our ring bearer since the time that we got married. And so I put in a little inscription for my husband underneath, not entirely out of sentimentality, like I'm not a cheesy person, but I couldn't stand the big empty space. Like there's just like, I'm a maximalist at heart. I'm a very gaudy maximalist kind of person, and I just can't stand that huge space. So I didn't stop at just the inscription, which was already gigantic. I went and painted a whole other turtle under the turtle. So actually, you're not getting 4 turtles for the price of 1. This is 5 whole turtles. And then I added some more waves around the outside because I really just couldn't stand the big empty space. Once I was satisfied with the giant mess I made underneath the turtle, I put that blue wash I mentioned earlier because this big turtle is supposed to be underwater, and I kind of wanted to make it look like that. So here is the final dish after all of the painting. So I still need to varnish it, but it's pretty much complete in terms of the scene and the vibe, and I was pretty happy with it. I mean, as happy as you can be after working for several hours on one thing. So I didn't actually film the part where I put the varnish onto the dish because I put probably 10 coats of varnish on the top of the dish on like the actual 3 turtles in the water to make it super glossy. But I do have some footage of me putting the bottom varnish. So this is just me basically reenacting what I was doing the day before, except I put like 10 layers of that varnish. This is just a very caveman way of putting varnish. As you can see, I spilled some onto the mat, which has not come off until now. And I tried to scoop it up with a brush and tried to make it go back onto the dish, but it did not. I would suggest putting the varnish into a bowl and not just slooping it directly onto the plate, but what's done is done. So here is the final ring dish. I'm really happy with the way it looks. In terms of colors, I really like how they turned out. Except what's kind of funny is that the one underneath became green, and I just said that I don't like it when people paint turtles as like green, like Crayola green, but I did it. In terms of accuracy, they're not very accurate, so there is still a lot of yellow showing. They're very light colored for turtles. They won't survive in the wild, and their faces look a little bit more Baby Yoda. I leaned into that uwu mouth a bit too much, but that's my alien interpretation of turtles. Anyway, if you made it this far, thanks for watching. Bye.